The Alaskan wilderness stretched endlessly before Dr. Elena Vasquez as she adjusted her research equipment near the edge of Denali National Park. As a wildlife biologist specializing in predator behavior, she had spent months tracking the movements of a legendary grizzly bear known locally as Kodiak's Shadow, a massive male that had eluded researchers for over a decade. The morning mist clung to the valley floor, and Elena's breath formed small clouds in the crisp air as she checked her camera traps one final time. Marcus Chen, her research partner and longtime friend, emerged from their makeshift camp carrying steaming cups of coffee. A former military tracker turned conservation photographer, Marcus possessed an almost supernatural ability to read the landscape and anticipate animal behavior. His calm presence had gotten them out of more dangerous situations than Elena cared to count. "The tracks are fresh," Marcus murmured, pointing to massive paw prints in the soft earth near their equipment. "He was here less than an hour ago, probably watching us set up." Elena felt her pulse quicken. After months of following scattered evidence and second-hand sightings, they were finally close to the apex predator that had captured her scientific curiosity. Kodiak's Shadow wasn't just any grizzly. At nearly 9 feet tall, when standing upright and weighing close to 800 pounds, he was a living embodiment of raw, untamed power. As they prepared to follow the trail deeper into the wilderness, a low rumble echoed through the valley. Both researchers froze, recognizing the sound immediately. It wasn't quite a growl, but rather a deep, resonant call that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath their feet. Elena's equipment registered the sound at frequencies barely audible to human ears. "He's communicating," Elena whispered, her scientific mind racing despite the primal fear creeping up her spine. "This isn't territorial aggression. It's something else entirely." Marcus slowly reached for his camera, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Years of military training had taught him that sudden movements could trigger a predator's attack instincts, but his photographer's intuition told him this moment was different. The bear wasn't hunting or defending territory. He was announcing his presence with an almost ceremonial dignity. Through the morning haze, a massive silhouette emerged from the tree line approximately 50 yards away. Kodiak's Shadow stood motionless, his dark fur rippling in the gentle breeze, amber eyes locked directly on the two humans. Elena felt her breath catch, not from fear, but from the profound intelligence she saw reflected in that ancient gaze. The bear made no aggressive moves, showed no signs of agitation. Instead, he seemed to be studying them with the same curiosity they had shown in tracking him. For several minutes, the three beings regarded each other in perfect silence, separated by millions of years of evolution, yet connected by something neither human could yet understand. Then, as quietly as he had appeared, Kodiak's Shadow turned and melted back into the wilderness, leaving only his tracks and the lingering sense that this encounter had been deliberately orchestrated. Elena realized with startling clarity that they weren't just studying this apex predator. He had been studying them as well, evaluating their intentions and character with the wisdom of a creature who had survived at the top of the food chain for over 2 decades. 3 weeks later, Elena and Marcus found themselves in the most precarious situation of their research careers. A sudden autumn storm had swept through the valley, transforming familiar trails into treacherous obstacles and forcing them to seek shelter in a small cave system they had discovered during their initial survey. The temperature had plummeted 20 degrees in less than 2 hours, and their emergency radio had been damaged when Marcus slipped on wet rocks while securing their equipment. Elena examined their supplies with growing concern. Their emergency rations would last perhaps 2 days, and the storm showed no signs of abating. Worse yet, Marcus had injured his ankle during the fall, making any attempt to hike back to their base camp extremely challenging. The cave provided adequate shelter from the wind and rain, but the dropping temperature would become life-threatening if they couldn't find a way to generate more heat. "We should have listened to the weather reports more carefully," Marcus admitted, flexing his swollen ankle with obvious discomfort. Despite his injury, he maintained the calm demeanor that had served them well throughout their partnership. Elena was about to respond when a familiar sound echoed from the cave entrance, the same deep, resonant call they had heard during their first encounter with Kodiak's shadow. Both researchers exchanged glances, understanding immediately that their situation had become infinitely more complex. A massive grizzly bear, seeking shelter in the same cave system, could easily view them as threats to be eliminated. The bear's silhouette appeared at the cave mouth, but instead of the aggressive posture they expected, Kodiak's shadow moved with careful deliberation. He entered the cave slowly, water dripping from his thick fur, and positioned himself near the entrance without approaching the humans directly. His behavior defied everything Elena knew about grizzly territorial instincts. For hours, the unlikely trio shared the cramped space in tense silence. Elena observed the bear's breathing patterns and body language, noting that he showed no signs of agitation or predatory interest. Instead, Kodiak's shadow seemed to be monitoring the storm's intensity, occasionally lifting his massive head to scent the air currents flowing through the cave. As night fell and the temperature continued dropping, something extraordinary happened. The bear began gathering dry materials from deeper within the cave system, twigs, leaves, and small branches that had blown inside over the years. With surprising dexterity, he arranged these materials in a loose pile near the human's position, then used his powerful claws to create sparks by scraping against the cave's mineral deposits. Elena watched in amazement as the apex predator essentially built them a fire. The scientific implications were staggering, but more importantly, the gesture demonstrated an understanding of human vulnerability that transcended species boundaries. Kodiak's shadow had recognized their need for warmth and taken action to ensure their survival, despite having no evolutionary imperative to do so. Marcus slowly reached into his pack and offered the bear some of their emergency food, high-energy trail mix that could sustain all three of them through the night. The bear accepted the offering with surprising gentleness, his massive jaws carefully taking the food from Marcus's outstretched palm without so much as grazing the human skin. That night, as the storm raged outside their shared shelter, Elena realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in the scientific literature. An apex predator had chosen cooperation over competition, demonstrating not just intelligence, but empathy, a quality that supposedly distinguished humans from other species. The storm lasted 3 days, and during that time, the boundaries between predator and prey dissolved into something far more complex. Elena documented every interaction, every gesture, every moment of communication between species that had no business trusting each other. Kodiak's shadow proved to be not just intelligent, but emotionally sophisticated in ways that challenged everything she thought she knew about apex predators. On the second morning, Marcus's ankle had swollen considerably, making it clear that he wouldn't be able to navigate the treacherous terrain once the storm passed. The bear seemed to recognize this immediately, positioning himself between Marcus and the cave entrance in what could only be described as a protective stance. When Elena ventured outside to assess their situation, Kodiak's shadow followed at a respectful distance, his amber eyes constantly scanning for potential threats. The relationship evolved from cautious coexistence to active collaboration. The bear's superior senses allowed him to locate fresh water sources and edible plants that Elena would have missed entirely. In return, she used her knowledge of weather patterns and terrain to identify the safest routes through the increasingly unstable landscape. Marcus contributed his tracking expertise, helping them all understand the movement patterns of other wildlife in the area. communication developed gradually through a combination of body language, vocal cues, and shared experiences. Elena discovered that Kodiak's shadow responded to specific tones and gestures, while the bear developed his own repertoire of sounds that clearly conveyed different meanings. When he wanted their attention, he would emit a soft huffing sound. When he sensed danger, his posture would shift subtly, alerting them to potential threats they couldn't yet perceive. The most remarkable moment came on the third day, when Elena fell into a concealed crevice while exploring a potential exit route. The drop was only about 8 feet, but the walls were smooth and offered no handholds for climbing out. Marcus's injured ankle prevented him from attempting a rescue, leaving them in a seemingly impossible situation. Kodiak's shadow appeared at the edge of the crevice within minutes, having heard Eleanor's cry for help from nearly a quarter-mile away. Without hesitation, the massive bear lowered himself partway into the opening and extended one powerful forearm toward Elena. She hesitated for only a moment before grasping the thick fur and muscle, allowing the bear to slowly lift her to safety. This rescue required an extraordinary level of trust from both species. Elena had to overcome millions of years of evolutionary programming that identified grizzly bears as mortal threats, while Kodiak's shadow had to suppress his natural wariness of human contact. The successful collaboration created a bond that transcended the typical predator-prey relationship. That evening, as they shared their meager food supplies around the small fire, Elena observed something that would haunt her scientific conscience for years to come. The bear was lonely. Despite his position as an apex predator, despite his physical dominance over his environment, Kodiak's shadow craved connection and understanding just as much as any social animal. His solitary existence, while evolutionarily advantageous, had left him emotionally isolated. Elena began to understand that their encounter wasn't random. The bear had been observing them for weeks, evaluating their character and intentions, looking for beings capable of seeing past his fearsome exterior to the complex individual beneath. Their mutual respect and gradual trust had filled a void in his existence that no amount of territorial dominance could satisfy. The storm finally broke on the fourth morning, revealing a landscape transformed by wind and rain. Fallen trees blocked familiar paths, and swollen streams had carved new channels through the valley floor. As Elena and Marcus prepared to return to civilization, they faced an unexpected emotional challenge, saying goodbye to their unlikely companion. Kodiak's shadow seemed to understand that their time together was ending. The bear's behavior had grown increasingly gentle over the past day, and Elena noticed that he spent long periods simply watching them with an expression that could only be described as melancholic. The bond they had formed transcended the temporary necessity of shared survival. It had become something deeper and more meaningful than any of them had anticipated. Marcus's ankle had improved enough for travel, but the terrain remained treacherous. As they began their journey back to base camp, Kodiak's shadow followed at a distance, never approaching too closely, but maintaining visual contact. Elena realized that the bear was escorting them, using his superior knowledge of the terrain to guide them around the most dangerous obstacles. Several times during their trek, the bear would position himself between the humans and potential hazards they hadn't yet noticed. Unstable rock formations, areas where flash flooding had weakened, the ground or territories claimed by other predators. His protective behavior was unmistakable, and Elena found herself documenting not just animal behavior, but genuine friendship. The most profound moment came when they encountered a pack of wolves that had been displaced by the storm. The wolves were hungry, desperate, and significantly more aggressive than usual. Under normal circumstances, even Kodiak's shadow might have avoided a confrontation with an entire pack. But these weren't normal circumstances. The bear positioned, himself directly between the wolves and the humans, rising to his full height in an unmistakable display of dominance. His message was clear: the humans were under his protection, and any threat to them would be met with the full force of his considerable power. The wolves, recognizing the futility of challenging such a formidable opponent, retreated to find easier prey elsewhere. Elena watched this confrontation with a mixture of awe and emotional turmoil. The scientific implications were staggering. An apex predator actively defending members of another species with no evolutionary benefit to himself. But beyond the science, she recognized the profound loyalty and affection that motivated Kodiak's Shadow's actions. As they neared the edge of the wilderness where their research station waited, the reality of separation became increasingly difficult to ignore. Elena had spent her career studying animal behavior from a position of clinical detachment, but this experience had shattered that professional distance entirely. She had formed a genuine emotional connection with a creature that most people would consider a mortal enemy. Marcus seemed to be struggling with similar feelings. Despite his military background and natural stoicism, he had developed a deep respect and affection for the bear that had saved their lives and shared their shelter. The thought of returning to a world where such connections were considered impossible felt like a betrayal of everything they had experienced together. On their final evening in the wilderness, Kodiak's Shadow approached their camp with something Elena had never seen in his possession before: a smooth, river-worn stone that gleamed with subtle mineral deposits. The bear placed the stone carefully near their fire, then settled back to watch their reaction. Elena understood immediately. The stone was a gift, a tangible reminder of their time together and the bond they had formed. In return, she offered the bear her field notebook, not the scientific observations, but a personal journal she had kept detailing their emotional journey together. Kodiak's Shadow accepted the notebook with surprising gentleness, holding it carefully in his massive jaws before placing it in a secure crevice near his usual resting spot. 6 months later, Elena stood before a packed auditorium at the International Wildlife Conservation Conference, struggling to find words that could adequately convey the magnitude of what she and Marcus had experienced. The scientific community had reacted to their preliminary findings with skepticism, fascination, and in some cases, outright disbelief. Footage from Marcus's cameras and Elena's detailed behavioral observations provided compelling evidence, but the emotional aspects of their story proved more difficult to quantify and communicate. Traditional predator-prey models assume that apex predators operate purely on instinct and survival imperatives, Elena explained to her colleagues. Our findings suggest that at least some apex predators possess emotional intelligence and capacity for interspecies empathy that we have dramatically underestimated. The implications extended far beyond academic curiosity. If apex predators could form genuine emotional bonds with humans, then conservation efforts needed to be fundamentally reconsidered. Instead of viewing these creatures as dangerous obstacles to human expansion, perhaps they could be understood as potential partners in maintaining ecological balance. Marcus had returned to the wilderness 3 times since their initial encounter, documenting Kodiak's Shadow's continued presence in the valley and his interactions with other wildlife. The bear had shown no aggression toward subsequent research teams, suggesting that his positive experience with humans had influenced his broader attitudes toward their species. More remarkably, other researchers working in different regions had begun reporting similar phenomena. A marine biologist in South Africa described an unprecedented partnership with a great white shark that had repeatedly guided her research vessel away from dangerous currents. A primatologist in Borneo documented a relationship with a dominant orangutan that had actively assisted in data collection efforts. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus, who was currently in the field conducting follow-up research. The message contained a single photograph, Kodiak's shadow sitting peacefully beside Elena's field notebook, which he had apparently preserved and protected throughout the harsh winter months. The image captured something that no scientific instrument could measure: loyalty, memory, and the enduring power of genuine connection. The scientific community was slowly beginning to accept that the boundaries between species were far more permeable than previously believed. Empathy, it seemed, was not uniquely human, and the capacity for interspecies friendship might be more widespread than anyone had dared to imagine. Elena concluded her presentation with a question that would reshape wildlife research for generations to come. If apex predators, creatures with no evolutionary need for alliance, can choose cooperation over competition, what does that tell us about the nature of consciousness, emotion, and connection in the animal kingdom? The answer, Elena knew, lay not in laboratories or academic papers, but in the wild spaces where humans and apex predators could meet as equals, setting aside millions of years of evolutionary programming to discover the unexpected bonds that unite all conscious beings in their search for understanding, respect, and companionship. The legacy of their experience would live on in every researcher brave enough to approach apex predators not as subjects to be studied, but as individuals capable of friendship, loyalty, and love.